Quick question. If you had to choose, would you rather live in a world where money doesn't exist, or in a world where pain doesn't exist? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. Our story begins with some lore about the world. For centuries, humans had stood at the pinnacle of all creation, until a strange new gene structure came and fucked shit up. The new genetic makeup was far superior to that of mere humans, giving rise to an entirely different species called Kimyos. The Kimyos were stronger, faster, better, and more resilient than humans in every conceivable way. And that was just the simplest complementary trait of their DNA. The more sophisticated aspects of their genes manifested as supernatural abilities termed talents. Although surreal, most talents were predominantly harmless. For example, the ability to manipulate simple elements and flex on the homies, or control your body's internal structure, thereby manipulating extensions of your body like bones. Some rare cases even involved altering the very cellular makeup of the body at will, enabling transformations into various non-human forms, like this pig bastard right here. Last, but certainly not least, in fact arguably the most significant trait, Kimyos could pull bitches. And I mean mad hoes, practically swimming in the huzz. Anyway, as with everything, there was an exception to the danger level of Kimyo talents. While most were generally harmless, some were truly heaven-defying. The elites among them held power strong enough to annihilate the entire world, possibly wiping out the human race. In the town of Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, amidst a bustling crowd, we are introduced to the MC of our story, Chay motherfucking Hart. Introduced as the contender of the night, Chay was set to face off against the human Quill. Astutely named, you guessed it, Quill. Despite the underwhelming naming sense, Quill was actually a formidable warrior, boasting an impressive record of 15 wins and 4 losses in his fighting career. Chay, on the other hand, had a measly 3 wins. But don't count him out just yet, because he'd been blessed by the Maiden of War. And all 3 of those wins were against Kimyos, despite him being human himself. At the gong of the bell, Quill didn't mince words. He directly activated his talent, Porcupine. It allowed him to stretch and harden his skin and muscles, forming sharp quills like a porcupine. Emboldened by his talent, he launched a relentless assault on Chay, dishing out punches and forcing him onto the defensive from the get-go. Pressing the attack, he whipped a roundhouse kick at Chay, which Chay barely managed to block before tumbling backward. Feeling himself, Quill paused his offensive to taunt Chay, telling him to stop cowering and face him directly. How long was he planning to turtle up like a bitch? Incredulous, Chay shot him a funny look. Who was he calling a turtle? Wasn't he the one with literal spikes all over his body, preventing anyone from getting close? Who was the real bitch here? Nevertheless, the challenge had been issued, and there was no way Chay would cower. He shot forward, arriving at Quill's flank in an instant. Ducking below a wild jab, he reared back for a nasty rib punch, but Quill was one step ahead, deploying his talent and spiking the shit out of Chay. Forced to retreat, Chay cursed the bastard. Who was he calling a cowering bitch again? Still, this was a superhuman fight. Complaining was pointless. Locking in, Chay quickly deduced the weakness of the porcupine bastard. He couldn't maintain his quills for long, probably 30 to 60 seconds tops. Surprised he'd been figured out, Quill kept up his cocky bravado, taunting Chay even more, telling him to come at him. Chay said bet and zoomed forward, bobbing and weaving through Quill's defenses. Spotting an opening, he darted in with a quick punch, rocking Quill's shit before withdrawing just as the talent reactivated. Just like that, the tables turned, with Chay dominating through careful, lightning-fast attacks. Spinning on his feet, Chay lunged in for a devastating kick primed to end the fight in one move. But the smirk on Quill's lips made it obvious. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. A trap. Sure enough, he activated his talent on his arms, waiting for Chay to land the kick and screw himself royally. But contrary to his expectations, Chay had seen through it. Withdrawing his attack, he landed gracefully, completing his feint before shooting forward to clock Quill in the gut. The unexpected move left Quill completely defenseless, and he was flung away like a ragdoll. Not one to miss opportunities, Chay closed in with a left jab. Quill countered by activating his talent on his face, preventing any attack there. But once again, it was only a feint. The real attack slammed into his gut. Suffering 2 consecutive losses and being made a fool of, Quill finally snapped. He grabbed Chay's arm and decided to play dirty, activating his talent and spiking the shit out of Chay's hand, making sure the Huz wouldn't get any loving tonight. But Chay tanked the pain and smiled broadly. He had him. Since Quill had already used his talent on his stomach, his jaw was wide open for a counterattack. Before Quill could curse his blunder, Chay rocked his shit again, this time sending him straight to sleep. With a sickening thud, the poor bastard was laid out cold. We switched scenes to the locker room, 1 hour after the fight. Although he managed to win, Chay was still just a mortal fighting a superhuman, so it was inevitable his shit would be rocked a little. He stood by the sink, nursing his wounds, while the commentary of another match echoed in the background, this one bloodier than his own, a true Kimyo versus Kimyo fight. Flexing his six-pack abs and manly physique, no homo, Chay barely had enough time to admire himself before trouble came knocking. A duo of sketchy-looking dudes who clearly came for the smoke. As expected, the trouble-seeking pair clicked their tongues in annoyance before stating their purpose. They wanted compensation. Apparently, they'd bet big on Quill winning, so Chay's victory was unacceptable. They threatened him to cough up cash, or else they'd really fuck him up. And he better not get any wild ideas about playing hero. They knew he was tired from his fight against Quill. Bleeding malice, they advised him to comply or face violence. Chay sighed and told them to close the door. Like the iconic scene from Kingsman, he was about to manners maketh man on their asses. The goons said bet and stepped forward, whipping out knives ready for the tango. Fast forward a few minutes later. We shift to the building's lobby. Behind the counter sat a receptionist who, for lack of a better word, was hot and bothered. Seriously simping for our boy Chay. Like a damsel in heat, she flashed back to their earlier encounter, her cheeks flushing at the memory. Chay had walked right up to her and called her by name. Demalia. That alone was enough to get the down-bad maiden soaked. Exploiting the opening, she shot her shot, telling Chay he looked particularly charming tonight, especially with the new scars, which only made him hotter. Chay nonchalantly thanked her, clearly uninterested, but Demalia wasn't one to give up easily. Feigning an aggrieved tone, she invited him to a celebration party afterward, accusing him of never making time for her on the side. Didn't he know she was a prime maiden, ripe and ready to be picked? Unbothered, Chay gave her the same flat reply. He'd be busy at home and wouldn't make it. Seemingly getting the hint, Demalia sighed and retrieved Chay's earnings for the night. But before handing it over, she tried one last time, telling Chay to look for her if he ever got cold. In other words, if he wanted cheeks, he knew who to reach. Pocketing the cash, Chay said, okay. If he ever hit a drought, he'd seek her out. Then, as if remembering something, he told Demalia to send someone to his locker room. Some unfortunate souls seemed to have slipped and fell in there. Fast forward again, now to Chay's home. Like a true protagonist, he monologued. Pain, although undesirable, lets us know we're alive. But why endure such pain? Why torture his body fighting superhumans while being just a mortal? He didn't say, but there was a greater motive behind it, one he hoped wasn't in vain. The following morning, a car was parked outside Chay's house. By the car stood 2 figures, constantly roasting him. The woman said Chay was probably inside disappointing a lady, dishing out weak strokes, which explained his lateness. The man countered that she was being too generous. No woman would tolerate Chay long enough to even offer the cheeks. Exiting the house, Chay overheard their chatter. His lips twitched. Did these fools really have nothing better to talk about? Ignoring them, he turned to Tevin, already knowing what was coming. As expected, Tevin called him out. He'd known Chay for 15 years, and in the 7 years Chay had lived in that apartment, no one had ever been inside. What was he hiding? Drugs or something? Chay brushed off the accusations, got in the car, and told them to drive. Destination: the gym. Arriving at Red Ember Gym, Chay looked at the building with a warm smile. This was his dojo, his home. Meanwhile, inside, an intense spar was underway. A Kimyo whipped a heavy kick toward an old man. This old man was Leo Thomas, a war hero of the Kimyo versus Human War, and the owner of the dojo. Chay described him as a kind but strict man, who treated them like his own sons, and gave rogues from poor backgrounds like them a way out. As for what exactly happened in the human versus Kimyo war, and what atrocities took place, that's a story for another time. Back to the spar. The Kimyo's kick was effortlessly dodged as Leo casually stepped aside. Persistent, the Kimyo readjusted and launched an unceasing barrage. Unfazed, Leo blocked and parried every strike before forcing him to retreat. Not relenting, the Kimyo blitzed to Leo's blind spot, aiming to catch him off guard. But as expected of an old man in a world where men die young, Leo wasn't to be underestimated. He intercepted the Kimyo, blocking a super punch with a single arm. Then, as if possessed by the ghost of Kung Fu, he blitzed the shit out of him, landing a flurry of punches before finishing with a savage palm strike that sent the Kimyo flying. But Leo wasn't done. Just before the Kimyo could soar off into the distance, Leo grabbed him and yanked him back into the fray. Using a judo technique, he flipped the poor bastard, sending him airborne like a hawk, only to yank him back again. Tossed, turned, and primed for a devastating finisher. The Kimyo could only watch in despair. Without suspense, Leo clocked his shit with a sidekick, laying him out flat. The force hurled him out of the arena, close enough for Chay to witness his pitiful fate. Chuckling mockingly, Tevin told Chay he was cooked. Once the master saw his broken face, his fate would be worse than that poor bastard. Clapping back, Chay told him not to worry. He didn't need sympathy from a man-child still being chauffeured around by his girl. Fuming, Tevin took the loss in silence. Back in the ring, Leo's harsh but dedicated coaching continued. As the old man polished the young Kimyo's ass, Chay and Tevin regrouped with the boys. They pitied Azam, who was getting his shit rocked by Leo. Then one of them suddenly remembered and called out to Chay, telling him to get ready. The master had been looking for him. With those foreboding words, the spar ended, and Leo turned his gaze on Chay, summoning him to the stage. Sweating profusely, Chay stuttered a whimper before reluctantly dragging himself forward. Once there, he immediately folded under Leo's stern gaze. Like a disappointed father, Leo scolded him for his carelessness. What would happen if he faced a powerful Kimyo and ended up dead? Would he be happy then? Enraged, Leo slapped Chay, venting some anger. Head buzzing and vision blurred, Chay scampered away, fearing another beating. Leo sighed in disappointment, about to start the day's lesson. But before he could, a loud clap rang out, drawing everyone's attention. Following the clap came a sinister voice, asking why Leo seemed so tense. Was his age finally catching up to him? Enter the first villain of the story, Roash Rampersad, a narcissistic bastard who'd made a name for himself in Trinidad. Recently ranked among the top 150 strongest Kimyos, his ego inflated to unbearable levels, earning him the hatred of nearly everyone. Though strong, he was now the most despised man in the country. Chay didn't know any of these guys, so he asked his master directly, "Who was this cocky bastard?" Tevin chimed in, seeking the same clarification. He then questioned the trio. Hadn't they seen the sign prohibiting visits during training hours? Or were they illiterate? The boys lined up, showing their unified stance. Roash, this sinister bastard, was not welcome there. Feeling the hostility, Roash clicked his tongue in annoyance. How was Leo raising trash like this? Was this really how they greeted their master's former student? Shocked, the disciples looked at Leo incredulously. Was it true? Roash was once part of them? But then, remembering their master's unyielding rejection of Roash, they shelved their doubts and told the trio to leave. Roash and his people clapped back, saying they weren't going anywhere. If they were that adamant about chasing them away, then they could settle it with a good-spirited, hot-blooded spar. Nothing beats the clapping of fresh cheeks in the morning after all. Fed up, Leo released his aura, the overwhelming flame power concealed within. His body burst into golden flames, scorching the very air around him. Furious, he told Roash to leave. This was his last chance. He wouldn't give him another. Though humiliated, Roash was truly humbled by the overwhelming power radiating from Leo. He had no choice but to swallow his grievance and turn to leave. But before he did, as typical of a budget villain, he left a final threat behind. Leo shouldn't think he was hot fire, literally. The world had changed, and several formidable people had emerged. He was no longer the peak of Kimyo power, nor did he have a clue of what true strength looked like. But he shouldn't worry. because Roash would enlighten him soon enough. Too bad that knowledge might come at the cost of his worthless life, and sooner than he thought. Having said so, Roash swaggered calmly out of the dojo. Time swiftly passed, and soon dusk arrived. While cleaning the gym, Chay's thoughts kept flicking back to the earlier altercation. Unable to suppress his curiosity any longer, he asked Leo directly, what was up with that bastard? And what was all that talk about him being a former student? Leo replied that Roash was indeed a former student, but his arrogance and vile nature had caused a falling out. Still, one thing remained true. Roash was one of the strongest disciples he had ever taught. Drunk on his power and constantly craving validation, Roash often challenged other disciples, beating them down just to prove his strength. He relished standing above others, grinning and jesting, taking his victories further and further, until he finally crossed a line he shouldn't have. One day, behind Leo's back, he organized a spar against a fellow disciple, Jacob. Things got out of control, and Roash ended up killing him. The whole thing blew up, and the police were called to investigate. But with limited evidence, it was ruled an unintentional homicide, the result of carelessness during the fight. Roash left the dojo after that, and hadn't returned, until now. Incredulous, Chay was shocked that Roash had managed to get away with murder just like that. Clicking his tongue, he told his master not to worry. If Roash ever showed his stupid face there again, he and the boys would kick his ass. Leo chuckled and threw some teasing jabs at him. Touched, he told Chay to head out. He must have his own business to handle. Fast forward to later that day at the clinic. Coming in for a checkup, Chay patiently waited for the doctor's arrival. Upon entering, the two, clearly fond of each other, exchanged some good-natured banter. The doctor reported that his daughter was pregnant again, expecting her 6th child. Shocked, Chay looked at him incredulously. That daughter of his was truly a freak, obsessed with the meat. But aside from that, did he have what Chay needed? The doctor nodded and listed off what sounded like an entire pharmacy's worth of prescriptions. He'd even added a new drug to the mix, guaranteed to help with Chay's internal bleeding. Then, remembering his last visit, he asked about Chay's eye. Any improvements? Chay replied that he hadn't felt any. His visibility was still at 60%. At this, the doctor dropped his carefree attitude and advised him seriously. He should really consider abandoning his fighting career. Sure, his body was stronger than most, likely thanks to Leo's training, but he was still just a mortal. Fighting Kimyos had pushed his body to the limit, and it wasn't an exaggeration to say he was lucky to be alive. His body was a complete mess. Even spending an entire evening listing defects wouldn't cover it all. He should seriously consider retiring before he dropped dead one day. Surely the money from the fight club couldn't be worth that much, right? Smiling sadly, Chay replied that he had no choice. Although he appreciated the doctor's concern, this was something he had to do, especially since the money was for a good cause. He thanked the doctor again, then put on a big, cheerful smile. He was a tough boy, he'd be all right. The doctor sighed and wisely let the matter go. It wasn't his place to meddle anymore. Bidding farewell, he wished Chay the best and encouraged him to seek him out should he ever need help. Chay said bet, and immediately thought of his succubus daughter. Maybe he should aspire to be her 7th baby daddy. Jokes aside, he quickly bid the doctor goodbye and left the clinic. Back at the dojo, a foreboding pressure lingered in the air. As if waiting for someone, Leo calmly flicked through his Bible. Soon, to his disappointment, the doorknob turned, and someone walked in. That someone was Roash, veiled in shadows, releasing an overwhelming killing intent. The night promised to be long and messy. Meanwhile, on Chay's side, the oblivious MC was on the phone with Tevin, discussing Roash's threat to their master. Tevin told him not to worry. Although a psycho, he doubted Roash was heartless enough to actually harm the man who had made him. Chay agreed, but still decided to check on Leo the next morning. It was always best to be careful. Tevin supported the idea but quickly excused himself, fearing the wrath of his girl for being on the phone too long. Besides, the succubus was giving him the look, so he knew shit was about to go down. All aboard to Pound Town. Meanwhile, back at the Red Ember gym, things had taken an unfortunate turn. The whole building was up in flames, the result of the clash between Leo and Roash. Amidst a sea of fire, Leo stood tall, glaring down at the defeated Roash. Unfortunately, things weren't as simple as they seemed. Despite being the clear winner, Leo was wounded, a fatal gunshot to the gut. He glared at the cause of his injury, a bastard wielding a gun on the side. Enraged, Roash scolded his nephew. Why had he intervened? Hadn't he made it clear Leo was his to kill? But before his nephew could justify himself, Leo suddenly appeared before him, bathed in flames, having used the Phoenix Spear technique to accelerate. He punched the nephew in the gut, sending him crashing into the wall. Once done, he turned his attention back to Roash, scolding him for his lack of honor. Was this how he'd raised his nephew? To sneak attack people during a duel? Enraged, Roash finally let out the emotions buried in his heart. He accused Leo of overlooking him, always refusing to acknowledge his strength despite all his efforts to make their dojo the best. As for Jacob, that weakling shouldn't have accepted his challenge if he knew he was too weak. Furious, Leo cut him off, telling him to shut his mouth. He wasn't worthy of speaking Jacob's name ever again. Sighing, Leo confessed that the gunshot wound was fatal. He wouldn't make it through the night. But before he died, he had to correct his past mistakes, namely Roash and his twisted, sinister ways. Burning in divine flames, he began Roash's rehabilitation. First lesson: a parent's tough love.